Hello, and welcome to American Amnesia. I am your host, Cliff Garner, and a few things. I picked up this just recently, and this is Ultimate Video Studio X9. This is from Corel, which made WordPerfect and all that. There it is. And this hopefully will help me to make better videos, sharper quality on the visual at the very least is what I want to get right away. However, I'm going to post this before I get this installed. Unfortunately, I don't know what the deal is. I put the serial number that's down on here. It's on this thing. Right? Put it on there, and it's not working. And so I went to the site to see if I was doing something wrong, and I can't see what I'm doing wrong. So imagine that. I go out and pick up this great software. It ran me about $100, and I can't use it. Ah! so I'm a little flipped out on that, but I do have it. I will be using it in the future, and I don't know what on earth I'm doing wrong. I can be so good with technology, and I can be so bad with it at the same time. It's just give me technology, see where it goes, and you just never know. And of course, I am and have been referring to The Revolt of the Elites, The Betrayal of Democracy from Christopher Lasch. I've been using this as a resource, and also as kind of a touchstone in a lot of things that I've been doing anyway. I think it's a vital book, and I can't stress my admiration of Lasch and what he did with that book enough. And so at any rate, I'm just mentioning it because I will be referring to the ideas out of it often, and I don't want you to forget. And I did go to the library. I picked up a few things there. This is The Rise and the Fall of the American Left. It's by John Patrick Diggins. I don't know Diggins. But I am actually looking to do some formal writing on and research on what I call the Great Sellout. One of the earlier episodes talked about that, and this is where the continuity between the 1960s radicals and those of the cry bullies today. The continuity is not there. It doesn't exist, and that I'm going to demonstrate that. And it is easy to demonstrate the whole direct action, as they call it, wing of the radical politics came to a close somewhere in the mid-70s, just kind of disappeared. And it was further repressed by the Democrats under Jimmy Carter. And that I'm hoping to find some stuff that I can use for that in that book there. Also, I picked up this one here, The World of Nations by Christopher Lasch, subtitled Reflections on American History, Politics, and Culture. This was a series of essays and articles that he had written between the mid-60s and 72. And there might even be some things for the Great Sellout in there. The Great Sellout was accelerated by the co-optation of the radical movement during the Democratic Convention in 1972 and the running for president by George McGovern in that same year. And McGovern's pathetic loss probably underscored, I suppose, the anger of these the former radicals, now Democrats, who I suppose that they never really lost that authoritarian streak that certain of them had by espousing, Maoism and certain other totalitarian-leaning creeds. So that's probably the case. And actually, it'll be good for me to go back and look at all that again in depth, because I'm sure there's things that I'm forgetting and somehow phrasing in my mind in a way that suits my own purposes, and so that's one of the nice things about going back and looking at things like this, especially when they're so personal, is that that I'll be returning to the original feelings, actually, and to the original ideas that I was dealing with, both for and against. And I tried to do another episode on all that, and the video itself is, I can't transfer it onto YouTube as is, so it depends on if there's anything I can use in the future and still transfer over, but I did have some more stuff on that, and a lot of things are coming back to me anyway, because this great sellout was something that was very hurtful to those of us who were directly involved. It was a betrayal of people that we at one time trusted and thought that they would be a little more sympathetic, at least. And they instead they turned against us with a lot of force. And in some cases, there were people I knew who were arrested and beaten, and there were protests that I had friends that went to that were actually beaten and gassed and everything else. So it was really to a lot of us a traumatic thing at some level. Anyway, another one I picked up, and partly under Lash's influence, of the meritocracy myth. See, the meritocracy has been another thing outside of social mobility that that has become this myth of what makes America great. And this meritocracy myth, if it's what I'm thinking it is, it will expose some of the, I don't want to say lies, but some of the rationales may not be as strong as they that we've made them into to justify this change in the American character. And so to take a look at that, the meritocracy has been a means of getting away from the idea of basic respect and equality on the basis of citizenship and of actual personal accomplishment, even, because what you're looking at instead is a kind of an economic materialistic, results-oriented viewpoint that if you make it, that you earned it. And that could be kind of ass backwards, because some people don't make it, but they've done all right. And is material goods and wealth the only marker by which we can go by? And I say you can't. Well, in place of that, the sort of market kind of thing. On the other hand, especially with the pseudo left, you have this pyramid of victimhood that goes up, which excuses everything, which I also find equally bad. So that's where Lash kind of intersects with my thoughts. Here's another one. Now this one I bought. I bought it at the Salvation Army in Decatur. I go there after I get off of work sometimes. Double entry by Jane Gleason White. How the Merchants of Venice created modern finance. One of the things that I keep saying is that the medievals were not as primitive as we make them out sometimes. And that's one of a couple books on Venice, kind of looking back at its influence and how Venice really bridged from the medieval time to the Renaissance. So they were probably one of the most important influences there. Venice, Florence, and you had Genoa a little bit later on. But these Italian city-states were very important in bringing about the Renaissance, one of the things they did was modern finance, and they were very important for that dimension of Western civilization as it grew through into modern times. Here's another one I bought. I bought this at the the Hope Center at Christian. It's a thrift store, Christian bookstore and stuff. And The Death of Truth, What's Wrong with Multiculturalism, The Rejection of Reason, and then a new postmodern diversity by Dennis McCallum. I'm not familiar with him. It looked good. I am not a postmodernist. I think that we should look beyond this increasingly degraded form of subjectivity, actually, to where it's just really stifling. And one of the things about postmodernism is that the way it fractures everybody, into small little groups that are incapable of finding objective truth, that it really does set us up for a totalitarian mindset to be ruled over us all as a kind of a pseudo objectivity. The state, often it's been said that the state has been erected as a god in modern times. So statism is really kind of a form of idolatry if you think about it. And this is actually the kind of like a final nail in the coffin, because not only is the state set up as to rule as a god, but it's also given the illusion of being an objective truth, embodying the objective truth itself. And this is, I think, dangerous. I think it's very dangerous as far as thinking goes. And I picked this one up. I almost always pick up something on medieval thinking and stuff. This is Patterns of Medieval Society. And this isn't exactly the daily life in a medieval city or something like that. This little more big picture kind of stuff. But it does have some of those aspects of daily life as well, and those kinds of things really interest me greatly. And this one here is another one that really takes me back. But this is Abby Hoffman, American Rebel. It's by a fellow named Marty Jezer. Or Jezer, I'm not sure. Jezer. And that's the first biography of Abby Hoffman that was written. I think it was late 90s or maybe even early thousands. Here, hang on a second. That was earlier 90s than I thought. 92. It's been out for a while. I think they did a movie based on that with the guy that was in Law and Order, Criminal Intent. Although I think he's a lot taller than Abby Hoffman really was. But at any rate, Abby was one of my heroes as a kid. And I'm hoping to find some stuff on the great sellout. And there's probably plenty of material actually there that at least underscores certain points of what was going on at the time. I don't think that the great sellout would have been possible if it weren't for the fact that Abby was kind of forced into fleeing abroad and going underground. The whole underground movement of certain people involved with what you call the movement, right? The radical movement of the 60s and early 70s. During the 70s, with the war in Vietnam becoming less and less of an issue, there was definitely a crisis on the left. You see, what was happening was that the war became a cause that was how would I put it? Espoused. The anti-war movement, it went everywhere. I mean, and the very success of it was probably the biggest problem of it. It went from being a bunch of college students who didn't want to fight in a war that was really made by the corporations, that the government was basically following the dictates of the corporations, of the oil companies, and I suppose rubber for tires, and you had a few other huge corporate concerns. Not to mention the whole philosophy of post-war American anti-communism. With the domino theory, and this kind of created a perfect storm in Indochina, which was originally a French battle, and we ended up taking their place because of largely because of the domino theory, and that we believed that we could not let any country fall to communism, and that philosophy, and we have to say it was dubious, because really, in the case of Vietnam, I think they misread it pretty badly. but it did serve a purpose, like in when we went on to work on the proxy war in Afghanistan with Al Qaeda. that this viewpoint was actually holding up very well, and that a lot of the proxy wars that went on during the Carter era, Carter carried out wars in there was Angola, and there was Afghanistan, there was there was a couple places in Latin America, Guatemala, and El Salvador was starting to heat up, and of course Reagan took it over and made it into the Iran-Contra thing. But you had all this continuity of from administration to administration, with this idea of confronting communism wherever it sprouted up. And while we lost in Vietnam and Cambodia and things, there were reasons why the domino theory didn't work so well there. But that said, I'm digressing from what was going on with Vietnam. It went from the students to being just about everybody and their grandmother was against the Vietnam War by early 70s, 71, 72. And when Nixon was elected in 68, he promised was a peace with what was it? I can't ever think of it. But peace with pride, peace with honor, a peace with honor, I think it was. The idea was to really fight it out and uphold the country of South Vietnam as a so-called free country, whatever you want to mean by that. But it didn't work in the long run, and I think the final pullout was Jerry Ford in 75, I think it was. And that when that happened, all the momentum that had been gained politically for the war was pretty much cashed out. And even before then, it was pretty much done. Nixon being elected, in spite of the fact that McGovern was probably more of a direct peace candidate, he was probably yanked us right out of there, whereas Nixon let it go on and on. When I was in D.C. in 74, I guess it was, they were actually, at the time we were there were all these last minute scramblings that were going on in order to get him to resign without further catastrophe to the U.S. It was a crisis. I was there at the height of the crisis and didn't even know it. We went to the White House and did the tour there, and did I do the tour there? Yeah, I think I did. But the thing was is that we were sitting around the back entrance. We're watching people going in and out the back. You know, they had the Marines back there, and they had the guardhouse and everything. There were people coming in and coming out, and it was a flurry. It was a flurry of activity. It was really, really pretty strange. And the news didn't tell us much. They were kind of being quiet. Now I understand that there was a lot more going on than has ever made the newspapers, and there have been some brief accounts in the papers and a few magazines, and a few interviews, and a couple books But the full story, I don't think, has ever been told. But apparently, the generals in the CIA were urging Nixon to step down, and that the Woodward and Bernstein, Woodward in particular, had the CIA contacts, and so he was getting a lot of inside information. He and Bernstein were, and that was a general. What's his name? Was it Caspar Weinberger? No, it wasn't Weinberger. It was one of the others. But at any rate, there was a lot of this going on behind the scenes between the intelligence and the military, and I understand that there was a battalion that was stationed somewhere near the D.C. area that Nixon was going to mobilize to declare martial law in D.C. right around the time I was there. That was going to be kind of an attempt at making a coup over, an outright military coup to preserve the presidency, and that there were generals that worked behind the scenes to shut that down. So that whole story, like I say, I don't think will ever be told. I think we're looking right now at a similar crisis. And the deep state would apparently have gotten rid of Nixon, and rightfully so. He probably was trying to maintain his presidency at all costs, finally. In fact, because he didn't do in Kennedy and fight for his right to be the president over the cheating that was done in Chicago back in 1960, that he probably resented being deprived the first time. But that wouldn't be the closest parallel to what I think we're seeing right now. And one of the things that, and I think we also saw a coup with JFK being assassinated and power passing on to LBJ. I think that's pretty fair to say. But I think we need to go back to look at the businessmen's coup. There was an attempt during FDR to probably come up with a more analogical crisis. And if it's true, then yeah, I think it would be a better analogy. And we really won't know all the details about the businessmen's plot. We do know that when FDR, who was part of the upper crust, the last person that was truly upper crust was Bush, but he hid it. His father was definitely that. But he wasn't considered a traitor to his class. FDR was. And this is something that we hear about Trump from a lot of the people that, talk about internationalism and globalism. A lot of them consider him a traitor to that because he himself is an internationally known businessman. When I was in Istanbul, I used to go to Trump Towers for dinner. In fact, I took my mother there when she came to visit me and help me pack and come home. So and I used to get my suits fixed, and dry cleaned over at the tailor over there, the tailor / dry cleaner. Come on. So at any rate, that was a place I went to. It was real close to where I worked. It was, and they had a couple great restaurants. Not to mention they had an Arby's, which by itself was enough reason for me to go. So at any rate, the thing is that he has been considered a class traitor, and so was FDR. FDR was because he was actually introducing a certain socialistic, and I don't think that we can really say that he was the one that brought in socialism. I think that would have been more like Wilson. And maybe to some extent, and it had been kind of a slow process that probably picked up some steam around the turn of the century, just because it was seen as a progressive kind of thing. But to say that America isn't and hasn't been a social democracy at a certain level is to really miss the point. We really have been, and even then, it's not like Europe. America is considerably less socialistic than Europe is, but that's kind of immaterial. What FDR was trying to do really did irritate a lot of the business people. And a lot of the very rich business people who were his compeers, and he stirred up a lot of hatred, and they threatened him. And there was a very famous shooting that happened when FDR was in a car sitting next to Tony Cermak, the mayor of Chicago, who took the bullet. So they tried to shoot him. At least once. We know about that one. That was a very famous one, and it's part of why we have Cermak Boulevard, I think it is, up in Chicago. But there's other things named after him. Cermak was, I believe he was, I believe it was Serbo-Croatian. But there was a community there at that time. This is 1930s. So there you go. And Cermak was, part of the Democratic machine. And the Democratic Party was kind of split over. Same kind of thing. So you had a similar situation. The Democratic Party was upset. The business people were upset. You had the Republicans weren't all that happy with him. They weren't helping him out at all and stuff. And then the Businessmen's plot bubbled up, and supposedly what had happened is a number of businessmen had taken General Smedley Butler, who's probably as popular a general as anybody in history, and they took him aside and told him that they wanted him to lead a bunch of veterans to overthrow the government. And instead of, he kind of okayed them and then got out the door and he turned them in. They picked the wrong guy. For one thing, he wasn't going to betray his country. Smedley Butler gave a very famous speech of war is a racket. And that he did lead a group of veterans to march on Washington to protest the lack of care that they got after World War I, which is probably one of the reasons why he was approached. He was known as a discontent, and that the soldiers, both active and and retired, respected him immensely. So if this was the case, see, what we have here is the deep state. What is the deep state? Well, the deep state is certain people within the government, those that really don't go away, bureaucrats mostly, and the powers that be that sit behind the government. Now, I've been talking about Lash's ideas on democracy, but I do plan to pull out some stuff from at least one of my versions of Diane Ziegler's The Irony of Democracy. This was a very well-regarded textbook that was around for years and had been used up until fairly recently. And what it did, it discussed the elitist factions, the plural elites behind American democracy, and that this this has been where the interplay behind the scenes in America has always taken place. And one of the elites behind the scenes is, of course, the governmental elite, and they're more of a managerial elite, and this has a comparable faction within corporate economics. But these are kind of more middle level people. They financially they do well, but their influence is beyond both their numbers and beyond their personal economic wealth. What they maintain is an important component of what we would call the elites that maintain the system here in the U.S. So that's what you're talking about with the deep state. You're talking about that section of people, the money people, the banking people, who were furious with FDR, and who put in Glass-Steagall that limited some of the things they could do. So when you look at what FDR was up against, I think what you're seeing is a little bit closer to what Trump is up against right now. Nixon's situation, in more ways, parallels that of Obama right now. And I want you to think about that. That he is trying to maintain power that he no longer legitimately has. He no longer legitimately has this power. And Nixon had already lost it by this point, of which I speak, in 1974 when I was there. So this is something I'm going to return to, and pretty majorly here in the next few days. But I want you to think about these things: the bankers, not the bankers, but the businessmen's plot, the deep state silliness going on right now with Trump, and those two being parallel, and the mobilization that Nixon was trying to pull in 1974 to save his presidency is very similar to what Obama is doing right now to Trump in order to save his legacy, which had already discombobulated anyway before he even left office. Think about it. So until next time, I'll talk to you.